Welcome to Transformed and Transformational, a TeachBeyond podcast. I'm Kian.
And I'm Heather. We're here to explore what it means to be transformed in our own lives and how that overflows to living lives of transformational impact in our communities.
Today we are continuing in our special series of 70th anniversary episodes.
It has been so good to hear stories of both past work and the more recent developments building on the foundation of what was set into motion decades ago. I know personally, I've learned so much more about the organization and the wonderful people of Janz Team and TeachBeyond through this.
Yeah, these episodes have been so interesting and engaging. If you missed that episode from 2 weeks ago, where we talked about the history of Janz Team becoming TeachBeyond, we'd highly encourage you to pause this episode and go back to that one to give some context for the stories we're going to hear today.
Right, and we'll link to that in the show notes, or you can go look for episode 159 with George and Beverly Durrance.
Today, David Durrance, TeachBeyond's current president, is back to help us introduce our guest.
Yes, hi, Heather and Kian. It's so good to be with you. I'm excited that today we have Jack Stenekes joining us. Jack has been involved with Janz Team and then TeachBeyond for more than 50 years.
And Jack has served in music evangelism and in the TeachBeyond Canada office, and we'll get into both of those different roles in our conversation today.
You know, it's interesting when you hear Jack tell his stories, you need to listen for the heart of the evangelist. Now, that changed over the years, but evangelism stayed with him throughout his whole life, and you're going to hear about those stories today.
That's really helpful to know what we can be listening for as Jack tells stories today.
Jack and his wife Pearl have been married for over 50 years, and they have 3 grown daughters and 7 grandchildren, all of whom live in Canada.
Jack was born in the Netherlands, grew up in Ontario, Canada, spent some of his young adult years in Saskatchewan, and lived in Germany for 9 years, and he's been living in the Winnipeg area in Manitoba, Canada since 1980.
Jack is retiring from TeachBeyond at the end of this year, so we are excited to have this conversation before he officially wraps up his time with TeachBeyond.
Jack has such a wealth of experience, and I can't wait for him to share stories and wisdom with us.
Let's go over to that conversation with Jack now.
Welcome to the podcast, Jack.
Hey, thanks.
Jack, we're so excited to have you here.
Jack, as we get started, can you fill everyone in on what your current role is with TeachBeyond and what does that look like on a day-to-day basis? Where are you? What type of work are you doing?
Well, I live in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, which some may not be familiar with. Nice and warm in the summer and very cold in the winter. I'm functioning actually since COVID days. I'm functioning out of my own home rather than going into the office every day, which has been great because that's kind of extended my time, I think, with TeachBeyond.
Mm-hmm.
Might have opted out earlier than I am doing. I am responsible for sort of the business and financial aspects of TeachBeyond Canada, which means all things financial, of course, mainly concerned with the outflow of money rather than the incoming of money. Donation income is a different matter. But looking after payroll in a very practical way, being responsible for that, doing the actual grunt work on payroll, and expense claims, and making sure that all things business-wise are looked after for office, that things can continue to run in the way that they should. And also preparing, actually committing myself to having financial information for our board in a timely manner so that they know what's going on from that perspective.
Sure. Such important pieces of what is happening that we don't necessarily think about when we think about missions or an organization that has teach in its name, but so key. And we're so thankful for that, Jack. And I know we'll get into in a little bit some of the other roles that you've played, but it's so helpful to know where you are and what you're doing right now.
Yeah, it's great to hear what you're currently doing, but we're going to go way back. We're going to zoom back all the way to your upbringing. Can you tell us about where you grew up, what that was like, and when did you first sense an interest in involvement in missions in general?
Well, it started, of course, 79 years ago in the country of the Netherlands, where I was born, along with all my siblings. So we were 6 boys in the family, no girls, and came to Canada in 1949. I was 4 years old, and so I grew up in the province of Ontario. And being in an immigrant family, it brought its challenges there as well in growing up. Of course, speaking only Dutch in the home to start with, and learning then to cope and to get along, not only with my brothers, but in the community as well. And so it was a very simple upbringing in that sense. My father
Mhm.
worked in a factory and was not well physically, and so those demands also came consistently as well with that with the family. But we're thankful we had everything we needed,
Mhm.
and the Lord was good to us, and I'm so grateful for the good Christian upbringing that I did have. My involvement in missions probably started as soon as I became a Christian as well, at about the age of 9, through the ministry of a Good News Club in our neighborhood, and then grew with that, being baptized at the age of 12 in recognition of my desire to follow Christ. And combined with that, constantly was an interest in missions, serving God in whatever way He would have me.
Mhm. Mhm. From there, I know you went on to study at Briarcrest Bible Institute then in Saskatchewan. And so what was kind of behind that decision? Was that part of your interest in missions, or what was that next step?
Probably in some respects, but I was a high school dropout. It's
Mm,
very interesting. I didn't really have an interest in education, in learning, and at the age of 16 just dropped out and for 2 years worked, helped my dad start a business, and then was challenged by a friend of mine to think about completing my high school training and going out to Caronport High School, which was a part of Briarcrest, the complex there. And I felt that that's what God wanted me to do, go and finish my high school, and then went into 3 years of Bible school training, and then stayed on and taught voice at Briarcrest and directed the Bible school choir. So, and that's where I met my wife at that time as well. So it was an interesting following God's call to do that, and opened up a whole world of opportunity, and introduced in a very more direct way to missions at the Bible school as well.
mm. That's so interesting too that you had experience with teaching at that point in time. And of course, back in those days, what was Janz Team Ministries that would eventually become Teach Beyond was focused on music, but you were teaching music. So that's a really interesting integration of the two early
True,
on.
that's true. Although when we say it was music mainly, it was also evangelism, and music was to undergird and support the work
Yeah.
of evangelism, and it always was meant that way. And for me personally, and for the group that I was with, that I started with, the Janz Team Singers, all of us were actually students at Briarcrest, and that's where we got to know one another.
Mm,
And that developed into becoming a group that was then challenged to go over to Germany and do evangelism to
mhm.
young people, to the youth of Germany. And so that was an interesting development, going to Bible school and being introduced to not only Jan's team in that sense, but the people that I was going to be working with.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So when did you first meet those people who would become the Janz Team Singers? And was it actually a thing already, or were you kind of part of the very beginning of what would become Janz Team?
Well, it was very interesting during the 1950s, late 1950s, I think it was. My father bought a radio. It was a cabinet radio, so it was a piece of furniture. With that radio that he bought from a Schneider Hi-Fi in Hamilton, Ontario, came a recording, actually a single. I think it was maybe even two singles of Hilder and Leo Janz singing, and that was my first introduction to the Janz name.
Uh-huh.
Uh, Little did I know that later on I would be introduced to the Janz organization, but also one of the sons of the founder of the organization, Leo Janz being the founder, his son Ken, I met at Bible school, and he was one of the fellows that I joined forces with to form the Janz Team Singers. which
Okay.
then later went to Germany. So it was an interesting development. I met the Janz brothers, that is Leo and Hilder, the seniors,
Uh-huh.
during my years at school. And then, of course, also became a relative in a sense of the Janzes by marrying the sister of Ken's wife. So we married sisters. So it's an intricate kind of a thing
Yeah.
that happened there. But that's sort of it was an evolution of introduction to all things Janz.
Sure.
When you got involved with the Janz Team ministry, were you an evangelist who was singing, or did you see yourself as more a singer who was doing evangelism? What kind of was the main draw for you?
A singer doing evangelism. I never
Sure.
did the proclamation. Ken Jantz, who was in our group, and my brother-in-law, he was the proclaimer, as it was, the evangelist. We always combined our musical presentations with the preaching of the word
Mm.
and giving an invitation to for people to trust Christ.
What was the point, Jack, at which you realized, oh, wow, this is something that is bigger than what I thought it was, or bigger than, just me singing here? Like, was there a moment for you that you remember thinking, wow, I am a part of something that is beyond me? It's clearly the Lord at work.
Yes, I would say probably when we did our evangelistic events, called them Gospel Days, actually, to youth. We did them. We would have the event in a school gymnasium. We'd have up to 80% unchurched kids that would come out for these events, and I think in those occasions, I realized, wow, God is doing something very, very remarkable through our presentation of the gospel through music and through the preaching of the word. And kids responded, and I was just very thankful for those opportunities.
On a previous episode, we heard a little bit about how the Janz Team started and the revivals as they kind of traveled around Germany. Is that what you did? You do kind of a similar thing with your group? What did that look like as you were doing your ministry?
Yes, we did. Although we actually went into schools and
Hmm.
did music presentations, sort of as an invitation to the evening events that we would have. But we were out in the school yards, basically, set up our sound system, and the kids gathered around and were impressed with the music that they were hearing, and would then follow up and come out to the meetings that we had. So, yeah, it was very similar to uh, the original crusade evangelistic meetings that the organization started with in Germany.
I'm curious to hear about the transition of your musical group because I know it started as a team and then eventually you kind of became a solo act. That was kind of a long journey through all those years, wasn't it?
It was, but you look back now, and it wasn't as long as we thought it was at the
Right.
time. Uh, the group Janz Team Singers existed for 4 years, so
Okay.
from 1971 till about 1975. And at that time, some of the members felt that they wanted to go into a different direction musically and also ministry wise. And I didn't feel that that was what God had in store for me. And so
Mhm.
opted out actually at that point, not knowing exactly then what I would be doing.
Yeah.
But it was
Yeah.
remarkable how God just opened up doors of opportunity because then as a soloist, Larry Jantz, who was also an evangelist in Germany, was very pleased that I would be available then for his meetings
Mm.
to present just a solo ministry of music in his evangelistic events. And there were other opportunities through concert presentations and so on that I was able to take up immediately, not being a part of the Janz Team Singers anymore, which then became a different group and organization, and left the Janz Team at that point in about 1976. So those were tumultuous years, you might say, because there were changes in the organization. Also, Hilder Janz, who was one of the founders, left the organization, and there was all of a sudden an opening for a solo presentation in Leo Janz's evangelistic crusade, who Leo Janz being the founder and the evangelist that started the organization. So, even though changes were there, doors of opportunity also became available immediately.
Yeah. That's really affirming. Sometimes you do have to wait a little while before you actually see what the new thing is, but that's really exciting that then, oh, because I said this no, this other yes, I can say this other yes.
Exactly.
How
Yep.
did you discern? I mean, maybe there's that discernment point of I'm going to become a solo artist separate from this group, but also even just the little yeses of, oh, yes, Larry, I can come to that event. How do you know? You might not have known how strategic one particular event was over another. So what did it look like for you to be discerning about where your yeses were during that season?
Well, I was available, and I think just it's not necessarily in a person's ability, but a person's availability. And because I was available, the invitations came to be involved, and
Mm,
I didn't need to do a lot of assessment. Hey, is this what I should be doing? I felt that it was God opening up the doors, and just stepped in. So there wasn't really a feeling of skipping a beat in that sense,
huh.
to use a musical phrase, but to really just go ahead, and God had opened the door. I think it was Corrie Ten Boom said, "When God shuts a door, He opens a window," and that
Yeah,
was sort of the way I felt.
yeah,
Immediately, there were opportunities, and that was gratifying, and also a relief in a sense for me
yeah,
from a ministry perspective.
It is amazing to hear kind of all the changes, and that's kind of what we're going to dive into next. Is as the years have gone on, your role within the organization has shifted and changed quite a bit, along with the organization just having so many big changes as well. So a few episodes ago, we talked about how TeachBeyond used to be Janz Team, and you were integral in that shift to becoming TeachBeyond. So could you tell us what roles you've had over the years and how you've seen the ministry grow and change over time?
Right. There have been a variety of responsibilities that I have had, right almost from the beginning. In fact, very close to the time that things were changing for the group, the Janz Team Singers. I was asked if I would take over the responsibility of looking after the Canadian office from Germany. So that was kind of an interesting responsibility that was handed over to me, and I did it gladly because I felt even at that point in time that God had given me a certain gifting, perhaps you could call it, to administrate in various ways. And so I was responsible for the Canadian office, moved it from the home of Bev Durance's parents to downtown Calgary. And then that was in 1974. In 1978, we moved it from Calgary to Winnipeg, seeing the need for even having some assistance because we were growing and the many more people to take care of, particularly Canadians in those days, because we were a larger organization, so to speak, as a Canadian organization than we were as an American organization. And so that was my first step into administrative responsibility. When Hilder Janz saw his way differently than staying with Janz Team, there was a need to direct the music department in Germany, and they asked me to do that. So I stepped into that role as well for 4 years until we moved back to Canada in 1980. At that point, it was essential that we had someone taking care of the Canadian office. So there again, I was tapped for that. Felt a little bit through the years like the little Dutch boy that put his finger in the dike to save the town. I had to
yeah.
step into, stepping into the gap where there was a need, and did it gladly, and trust that God helped in that respect as well. So just very thankful.
Let's take a short break for a special 70th anniversary story.
My name is Nadine Ryan, and I'm from Newfoundland, Canada. I recently joined the TeachBeyond organization, or I'd rather say family, as I am partnering with the Canadian Christian Education Movement, which is a project of TeachBeyond. And what a joy it was to be together recently and spend time with Jack and hear about the stories of how this organization or this family has grown. 70 years, what a rich heritage that TeachBeyond has come from. And in today's current society, so many things are fleeting, but God has sustained TeachBeyond, which was formerly known as the Janz Team, and we are really, truly seeing His hand move, especially in the education realm, Christian education. It is my joy and my honor to serve with such wonderful men and women of God who've been a part of this family much longer than I have.
I'm so curious, as they asked you to lead the office as you were a solo artist, how did that feel? Making that big shift, them asking you to do it, were you excited about that change? Was that kind of a hit because you were on stage singing and now you're going to be in office? How did you emotionally take that change?
Well, to start with, at least I could do both. It wasn't eliminating one because of the other. And so all through my years, it's always been a combination of things, except these later years where physically and so on and age-wise, it wasn't possible anymore to do the solo ministry. So, and accepting that fact was something that I had to just get accustomed to and accept in a gracious way. Well, that's what God had for me. So all through my time with the organization, it's accepting what God had prepared for me.
Thinking about the crucial moment of Jan's Team transitioning to Teach Beyond and changing its name and its focus, and maybe other crucial points in the history too. How did you sense the Lord's leading specifically in that? And, having such a pivotal role with the organization, overseeing finances, that was, part of the decision. What was that like for you, Jack?
Well, it sort of grew out of a couple of things. First of all, financial challenges and difficulty through the mid 1990s. That led to an evaluation of where we had come from and where we were going by George Durant's of the organization. Who are we? What are we really doing? And his evaluation in 1998 we came to the conclusion that really we had already become an organization that was really more educationally centered than we were evangelistically, because the founder of the organization had retired. Many things had changed already, and we weren't as involved anymore in evangelistic crusade ministry. Music was still there to a certain degree, but we were highlighting, in essence, Black Forest Academy back to our supporting constituency in North America and in Canada in particular. And so it was very obvious that something had to happen. And so I was involved in the establishing of a task force in Germany that some of our people determining what direction we should take. The recommendation was that either God had to do something miraculous, or we had to just join another mission and just be absolved or dissolved into another organization. And I took that to our people at Black Forest Academy, because that's where the majority of our serving missionaries were, to find out how they felt about it. Should we just hand ourselves over to another mission? And the resounding response was no, we need to trust God. And from that point on, God did a miraculous thing. We managed to recover financially, and that spurred us on to looking at other possibilities for the future, which then gave birth to what became Teach Beyond.
I love how you mentioned the getting input from those who it would be affecting. That feels like a really important piece of anytime there's change. We're looking to the Lord for direction. We're looking at the data and the information, whether it's finances or other information in front of us. And we're looking to those it affects and gathering all that information together. So it's really interesting how that all kind of coincided in that moment. 1998 is about 10 years before the actual official name change, though. So that's
Yes.
quite a lead up. That's a whole decade of seeing a new direction coming. What did it look like to be in that decade of knowing something was coming, but not yet knowing exactly what it was or stepping into it yet?
Well, it was very interesting. We felt it was important because we were a team of missionaries. We're not just an organization that imposes its direction or its decision making upon people. The team has to be involved, and so we felt it was extremely important for all of people to take ownership of what was happening.
Mm.
Also, I worked very close with George Durrance and also the others who were part of the task force, people like Mark Weeb, who was chair of the Black Forest Academy Board. They were all involved in determining what our direction should be. And that was all preliminary to becoming Teach Beyond, which happened then at a board meeting in Winnipeg here when it was determined that that's what our name should be.
Wow. I just feel like that decade we can so often fast forward through in this conversation, in talking about history and what has happened. But 10 years is actually a long time to be in that in between.
Yes,
And while you're living it, it's maybe slow or, uncertain, but then you look back and think, okay, well, 1998 we got some direction and then 2008 we made the name change. It wasn't that simple. You were
right,
living those 10 years in the middle.
right. No, it's very interesting because when you do look back, you see it in perspective, and that's not possible when you're in it. With all the changes that took place, I'm
Mhm.
just so grateful that the Lord impressed upon me just to stick with it and do what you need to do at the moment.
Mhm. It is interesting, as you even described it. In when you looked around, you said, "Oh, actually, Janz Team is already doing education now," and it's just kind of acknowledging that change and maybe making it official. And but you also, I mean, you have this long background history of doing the music, and then it switches over to education, and you stuck with it. You were part of that transition, and you didn't say like, "Okay, if you guys go like the education route, I will give you my blessing, but this isn't for me." You actually were crucial to making all those transitions happen.
Yeah, I never really felt that I'm out of here kind of an approach to things. Let's do this together. The Lord has a way forward. He has solutions for us, and I'm happy to be part of it. A person doesn't have to be in the limelight. That's not necessarily where it's at, and you just have to even sometimes work in the background and just be part of what's happening at that level and
Mhm.
just very grateful.
Yeah, I love that. As we are kind of at the present day and we look back, what's something you wish you could tell your past self with the perspective you have now? I'm not sure if your past self would have always been could have foreseen where you'd be now. So what's a word of encouragement or advice you would give your younger self?
Well, to be patient and to accept what God has for you, not to be discouraged or disillusioned or despairing in that sense, but rather to accept it and to move forward and just anticipate that God is going to continue to give you a means to serve.
That's such good advice, and we can see that evidence through your story of being available and trusting the Lord's direction and not wanting to just get out when things are changing, but to stick with it through that time. So, yeah, that's great advice, Jack. As we also look back, we want to, in these 70th anniversary episodes that we've been doing, we want to see what from our Janz Team history do we want to continue carrying forward? What do we need to be remembering? And then also, there are new things up ahead for Teach Beyond and new opportunities. So I'd love to hear from you. What's something that you hope doesn't change or that we can keep carrying into the future from our history as Janz Team? And what excites you about where Teach Beyond's going in the future from where we are now?
Well, to start with, I think it's important to realize that our vision and our purpose should be to reach people for Christ. And that was always uppermost in what we were doing with the evangelistic events. We were not necessarily aiming for the intellect of individuals, but rather for their hearts. And right from the very outset, it's amazing. Very soon after the Second World War, it was in the around 1950, 1951, that the Janz brothers, the quartet and the duet, Hildur and Leo Janz, went to Germany under the auspices of Youth for Christ and sang their way into the hearts of people that were totally devastated by the Second World War. And it moved them to seek to follow Christ in a very meaningful way. And I hope that we don't lose that. That's my prayer for the organization, that we actually aim for the heart of people, not just for their minds, and that would be our determination going forward.
That's great. And then what excites you about where Teach Beyond is now headed into the future?
Well, I think this is the growth that has been there, exponential growth actually, has been very reassuring that this is the direction that God had in mind for us. Because we see other areas of ministry that have not developed and grown in the same way. And so this is, to me at least, a real stamp of approval from the Lord that this is the direction we should go. So I trust that will continue
Mm,
with God's blessing.
mm. Yeah. I think numerical growth, it's so interesting because it doesn't always mean that things are good. It often does,
True.
right?
Yeah.
But numbers aren't always everything. Dare I say that to a finance guy and one who has been really thought deeply about that. But I'm curious your thoughts about what advice you would have for us as an organization. My role is in recruiting and mobilizing people to go. And as there's exponential growth, there is exponential need for people to serve in various roles. And so I'm curious your advice in the times when something feels bigger than we can possibly, do on our own. Obviously, I'm saying this knowing that it's all through the Lord and his empowering us to do the work in front of us. But yeah, what advice would you have for us as we think about living in this time of exponential growth and opportunity?
Well, that's there again. I would come back to our availability and the fact that God is going to provide what we
Mm.
need for the moment in the times of challenge. And that's what I experienced as well. I was not schooled or educated to do certain things. God has given that natural ability and gifting, and to rely on Him to provide what is needed at the
Mhm.
time that it's needed.
Amen. Yeah.
Jack, thank you so much for joining us. This has been such an encouraging conversation. It's so amazing to hear how God has worked in your life and through your life. Before we let you go, Jack, there's one question we like to ask all of our guests, and that's what's one thing that's changing your life right now. So this can be something big or something small. You can kind of take it whichever direction you choose. Heather and I will go first, and then you can go. So what's changing my life this week and this past couple of weeks is I did something I've been wanting to do for most of my life, and that is going to the hardware store and buying one of the big walls that's a dry erase board marker wall. Uh,
Oh.
I've always wanted to get one of those, and I never had a real reason, but my kids wanted it too, and so I was able to use them as an excuse. So I now have a big dry erase board kind of wall, shower wall thing that you can use, and it's been very fun.
Oh, that's cool. So I'm guessing that it's getting used for like drawing more than it is like brainstorming at the current moment.
Yeah, it's a go back and forth.
Yeah.
a tug of war.
It's dad's turn now. That's
Yes.
great. Well, what's changing my life is just kind of more obvious from these past few episodes that we've done on the 70th anniversary series. And so I'm just going to go ahead and say that this is changing my life to hear the stories that I've been generally familiar with now, serving with the organization for 14 and a half years, but actually talking with people like you, Jack, to hear more about how God has been at work in your life. I think it just reminds us of how God has been faithful through tumultuous seasons, not only for the organization, but in history. And also how yielding our lives to Him and surrendering to Him is the best way to live. And so I just appreciate these conversations and how that's been impactful to us as people who continue to serve with the organization and who are seeking the Lord. And so that's a thank you to you, Jack, and also to our past few guests as they have shared their stories. What about you, Jack? What's changing your life right now?
Oh boy, at my age, there is the usual concern of physical
Mm,
capacity,
mm,
physical abilities, the challenge of health, things that come that creep into almost everyday life, and learning to trust God even in these times,
mm,
not being able to do as much as I used to, both mentally and physically, and just realizing that and coming to grips with it, but also being at peace with that, because that's just the natural scope of life, the way it evolves and the way it goes. And so, just yeah, being happy in getting old.
What a great perspective. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Jack. We really appreciate all that you've shared and your work over these many years with Teach Beyond.
Great to be with you guys.
It is so inspiring to hear Jack's story and realize that he went from being a solo artist and almost the face of the music side of the Janz Team to now having such a behind the scenes role in accounting and finance. And it's just so inspiring, the humility that Jack shows.
You know, one of the things that we love in Teach Beyond is following people's yes, Lord stories. And that was
Mhm.
like Jack's story. It was like different inflections points where yes,
Wow.
Lord actually meant different things and looked totally differently. But it was all these sort of moments in his life where we say, oh, yep, Jack said yes. And the output was totally different than what we might have expected. But God used him in mighty ways.
Yeah, the yes, Lord isn't just one time. It's yes all along the way. That's such a good reminder. Well, Kian, David, Jack, and I all serve with an organization called Teach Beyond. As you have heard, education plays a big role in missions, and Teach Beyond is a part of that.
As followers of Jesus, Teach Beyond is a global community providing transformational education services as part of God's ongoing mission to transform individuals and communities into all He intends.
Want to learn more and get involved? Visit teachbeyond.org or follow us on social media.
To help more people find the podcast and hear about Teach Beyond, we'd love it if you would leave a rating or review and share the show with a friend. Be sure you subscribed or following the show on the platform you listen so you never miss an episode.
And as always, you can reach us at podcast@teachbeyond.org. We'll see you next week. And stick around to hear some music from the Janz Team singers, including Jack Stenekes.
The marketplace is empty, no more traffic in the streets. All the builders' tools are silent, no more time to harvest wheat. Busy housewives cease their labors, in the courtroom no debate. Work on earth is all suspended as the king comes through the gate. Happy faces line the hallways, those whose lives have been redeemed. Broken homes that he has mended, those from prison he has freed. Little children and the aged, hand in hand we stand all aglow, who were crippled, broken, ruined, clad in garments white as snow. I can hear the chariots rumble, I can see the marching throng, the flurry of God's trumpet Amazing grace, oh, the King is coming, the King is coming. I just heard the trumpet sounding, and now his face I see. The King is coming, the King is coming. Praise God, he's coming for me. Oh, the King is coming, the King is coming. I just heard the trumpet sounding,